Let's talk about a feeling I'm sure you know. It's about being stuck. It's like having Groundhog Day. Even though you're doing well as far as everybody else is concerned, you seem to be the success, you seem to be very happy, you're doing most of what you need, you just feel like you're stuck in a loop. You're not achieving what you really want to achieve deep down. And rather than want, you're not achieving what you desperately need to achieve deep down. For me, this feeling didn't happen in a job. It happened in a lovely place I was living, with very nice people around, no financial issues, beautiful weather. It just happened. I realized I was stuck in a rut, to use an English expression. I felt I was in such a nice part of the world, full of tourists, full of beautiful restaurants and bars. I felt it was a place you just go to retire and die. And I certainly didn't want that. I felt it was lacking adventure. I love the sort of work I do, which nowadays is nearly all online, apart from some work I do in England. And it's helping people with emotional type problems, with grief. And I also do a lot of work with overseas academic students who are doing postgraduate qualifications at UK universities. I help them with the emotions of loneliness, the emotions of cultural difference, the different education systems, that type of thing. And at the moment, loneliness and communication skills is a big problem for many people. I had a story in my head developed over a lifetime that when I was talking to someone, it was my responsibility to help them, and I'd do my best. I'd go out of my way to help them. I also worked in peace processes where I'd go out of my way to help communities, traveling there and everywhere. It didn't matter how many hours that took, but it was my responsibility because that's what I told myself. If I saw the people, the communities the next week, the week after, if there'd been no improvement, that to me, and especially to my ego, was a sign of failure. And it made me I felt a little bit down, a little bit low, a little bit depressed. I began to lose confidence in myself, I suppose, and my abilities to help. Then I realized through doing some academic research, PhD research, on something called reflexive learning. That's reflexive, R-E-F-L-E-X, reflexive learning. And don't worry, this is not an academic talk. I learned to realize far more about myself. I realized that it was important not to be analyzing the people or the communities in front of me. It was equally important, in fact, in my case, more important, to be analyzing me as well. I could go to a meeting, one person, 100 people. I could help them analyze the problems in their community, the problems in their family life. I could help them deal with threats even because of the work I was doing. I could help them with academic work as well. And if they didn't listen to me, I knew from my story that had developed over my entire lifetime, I knew I'd failed. When I understood this idea of reflexive learning, when I began to analyze my own thoughts rather than the people in front of me, it was like lifting a massive weight from my shoulders. The responsibility changed completely. Rather than me trying to change people's biases, their understandings of lives, trying to get them to meet, in some cases, enemies, in some cases, their supervisors at universities who they were struggling with. When I was trying that and it didn't work, I was the failure. But suddenly, I realized life in a very different way. I changed my story completely. I was asking myself, why am I so triggered, so frustrated, so angry, so emotional when something I said doesn't work for somebody? Understanding why I was triggered by these biases, by these hatreds, by violent acts at times, by simply not having the guts to go and talk to an academic supervisor. When I understood the reasons in me for those triggers, I understood me 1,000 times better than ever before. It was a massive healing process. Even though nothing serious had ever happened in my life before, not compared to other people I've met, it was still a big healing process. This reflexive learning, all it really means, rather than having a camera on other people, you turn it round and you are videoing yourself. You're videoing your own mind and thoughts, your own reactions to what's been said. You're taking away your own biases. You're taking away the judgmentality that most of us have. And we're trying to become as non-judgmental as we possibly can in the circumstances. My frustration had come from this deep-seated, invisible belief that my worth was tied to their progress. That was a huge mistake. Nobody to blame apart from me and the story I had created over many, many years. And when I realized this, the frustration, well, it just dissolved. It's replaced by compassion. My students' struggles were no longer a reflection of me. This freed me up to be truly present with them. I know I became far more authentic with them, and still am. This is because my own fears, my own judgments, my own story were no longer getting in the way. It's an incredible emotional release when you realize this. Uncovering these invisible rules that we've made over the years, that's what many people would call self-realization. And it took me a lifetime to uncover these hidden rules in my own mind. The rule I had that in order to be valuable, I had to be effective and produce results. That was fantastic for a career. It made it relatively easy for me to get a PhD, but it didn't really help me with my relations with people. I'd be very much an introvert, even though I can speak in front of hundreds. If I'm invited, I can be an extrovert if I need to be. My normal way of being is the introvert and a loner as well at times. And the relations with people, trying to achieve, according to this story, that was creating burnout, serious burnout for me. It was restricting my freedom. Once I'd discovered that I had this invisible rule, this invisible story I'd created in my head, I knew immediately I could recreate new rules, get rid of the old, create a new story. The old story would exist, but I was now in charge of changing the future of that story, of my life. I do a lot of work helping people suffering from grief. And the big worry is, what do I say? What do I say? I'm so scared. I always tell them, just your presence can mean everything. And what I've realized from my reflexive learning experience, my value is my presence, my willingness to help, regardless of the outcome. This was a real growth for me. It transformed the way I work, act, think, transformed everything. Now, if I'm doing a talk, whether it be one-to-one, whether it be a big group, I have this sense of freedom that the outcome is irrelevant. I'm just doing my best. My presence is there. It'll either work or it won't work. And this for me was real growth. It transformed the way I lived and worked, and still does. Stop trying to be the expert with the answers. You imagine at a talk, someone asks you an awkward question. Many people panic. Perhaps you panic. I think I used to panic. But now, even if it's a topic where I think I know quite a lot about, I don't care if I don't know the answer. I can find the answer. I don't want to be the expert anymore. Not being the expert lifts a huge weight, a huge emotional weight. I shifted from being the expert to being a partner, a curious partner with the people I was speaking to. Instead of giving advice, I was helping people to ask themselves better questions about life. I didn't have to help them succeed along my timeline. I simply had to help them along their unique, sometimes messy journey of life. Because of this, my work became more joyful, more authentic, and ironically more effective. All because I stopped trying to fix them or fix communities, and instead, conscious I needed to fix myself. I probably do every single day, and I think nearly every person in this entire world needs to do that. Apologies if you're the one who doesn't. When I stopped trying to fix them, I began to understand myself far more. So if you're interested, how are you going to start this change? How are you going to start changing your story? Be happy to know I don't think it's about heavy journaling. You don't really need to go to therapy. Perhaps you don't need to do lots of meditating, although any of those and all of those can be a big help at times. Next time you feel jealous, you feel scared, you feel as if you're not achieving anything, you feel guilt. Instead of panicking, just pause, take a deep breath. Ask yourself, what story am I telling myself right now? In other words, what story have you created over your lifetime that's impeding with your happiness, your effectiveness right now? For example, in the days when I had to help everybody, I had a call from one girl I knew, and she didn't seem to be listening to what I was saying. And I'd spoken to her a lot previously. She looked very down, and I knew this was obviously my fault because I was responsible for getting her to change. And when I was thinking, what can I do? What am I doing wrong? She said, Marcus, a few hours ago, my father died. I was not expecting that. The story was obviously transformed immediately. I knew this was not my fault. Now, a few years later, I'm thinking, why did I ever think it was my fault in the first place? It's a story deep down in my subconscious that I mentioned before. Because of the work I do, I immediately changed my own story and immediately realized I had to do everything not to help, because I realized with grief, with death, that's impossible. I needed to do everything just to make sure that girl knew I was there. I realized my presence to her was everything. I didn't have to say a word. I just had to listen. Very difficult situation, but because I knew I could not help, just being there was everything. I had no pressure. I had no fears. I was literally there in a very authentic way at an incredibly difficult time, online, with someone in a country thousands and thousands of miles away. The second I realized I had to change my story, the power of that story, the power that was holding me back, the power that was causing deep emotional problems vanished. A few years before this particular incident, if the same thing had happened and someone told me, my father's just died, in my head, I would have been panicking, thinking, what do I do? How do I help? Now I know better. So the conclusion, your story that you've created in your subconscious, that's your power. I think the important thing is observing the observer. That means you need to be observing you. It's how we change from being mere passengers in our lives to becoming the narrator of our life, the writer of our life. We can't control the events that happen, but we can control our interpretation of those events. We can definitely control the meaning. It's not about blaming yourself for difficulties you've gone through in life or difficulties you're having right now. It's about realizing that you can decide to change how that story continues from now, this very moment. It's not about blaming yourself for the difficult things you've been through. It's about realizing that you have the power to decide to change that story from now, this very moment. And this is the deepest form of learning I've personally ever experienced. Thanks so much for listening to my story today. Having someone listen is such a powerful experience. And again, for you, you don't have to be telling people what they should be doing. At times, listening is the most powerful thing you can do, the most effective thing you can do. Be kind to yourself and get curious. Hope that helped.